Hello and welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I'm going to be demonstrating how to salt cure an oily bait fish for catfish fishing, striper fishing, or any kind of fishing where you're going to be presenting the bait on the bottom. What you'll need is a fresh oily fish of your choice, preferably non-frozen, salt, a Ziploc bag, and some heavy-duty paper towels. I highly recommend that you wear gloves and you do this process somewhere where there aren't a whole lot of people, particularly outside, because this process can often get really smelly. First, I will pat the bait fish dry. The reason I like to pat the fish dry is because when I add the salt, I will be creating a process called osmosis. What that'll do is that will draw out the max amount of moisture depending on how long I leave it in the Ziploc bag. After patting it dry on one side, I will turn the bait fish over on the other side and I will pat the other side as well. It's okay to have a little bit of liquid on the bottom because I'm going to apply the salt and the salt is going to pull the moisture from the fish. Now I will straighten out the sardines and I will start to apply a very thin layer of salt on each side. The amount of salt I will be adding will be dependent upon the bait fish I'm using. For sardines, I like to add a very thin layer of salt on both sides, while as if I were to be using anchovy, I will add a whole lot less salt. Mackerel, on the other hand, I will add a lot more salt because there is more surface area, particularly to cover. I find that this technique will work on any oily white meat fish, whether it be anchovy, sardines, mackerel, or smelts. What this technique will not work on is the salmonid species despite them being oily. I believe it is because of the texture of most trout and salmon that the salt will actually break the flesh apart. Now I will get the Ziploc bag and I will pack that sardine on the bottom of the bag and I will pack them as tight as I can. All I'm doing is I'm just laying them down on the bottom of the bag, and what I like to do is to reverse each fish. So I will face the head one way and then the next fish I will face it the opposite way. It is almost like layering a lasagna. You just want the fish and the salt to be packed next to each other, and what this will do is when it draws out the moisture, you will get a very firm product as the end result. Afterwards, I will seal the bag tight by pushing out as much air as I can. Then I will leave it in a cool place for a minimum of at least an hour. The time it sits in the bag will depend. I normally prefer an hour if I just need to fish immediately or the next day. Then I will prepare the wax paper. I'm lazy, so I prefer to get these little pre-cut wax paper that I picked up from my local Daiso store. You can use regular wax paper, but you will have to cut it according to the size of the bait fish. I like this style of pre-cut wax paper because it'll actually fit just the amount of bait fish I tend to pack for a day fishing trip. After an hour, this is what the sardine looked like. All the liquid had began to render, and this is what I'm going to get rid of. Now I will pull the sardine from the bag and I will dry them. As you can see, the texture had gotten a lot firmer. The gut pouch is a little bit out, but that is okay. I will lay out the paper towel now, and I will start to assemble the sardine. What I'm going to do is almost like a pre-step to smoking fish. I'm going to dry and get rid of as much of the moisture as I can. What this will leave is a supercharged, super packed, oily bait fish that many catfish and stripers will absolutely love. I will assemble the sardine on the paper towel and I will assemble them in opposite direction because I'm going to roll them and I'm going to pull as much moisture from the fish as I can. The reason for this step is because I want to get rid of the excess moisture. That way I can just get nothing but a very firm and supercharged oily bait fish for fishing. Now I will roll the fish. I will put a paper towel on top and I will pat that and start to roll it inward. Almost like a burrito. What I'm going to do afterward is I'm going to press tight. Not so tight that the fish disintegrate, but just enough so that the moisture will be absorbed by the paper towel. This step is vital and is very important. What happens is, if you don't remove the moisture will actually cause the sardine or the bait fish to start disintegrating. Just like smoking fish, the excess moisture is not good. What it does is the salt will actually be reabsorbed, and with that being done, you'll get a bait that is too soft to be hooked properly. This is what the product should look like. It is firm to the touch but not disintegrating. As I said before, this technique will work with any oily bait fish as long as it's not trout or salmonid. Oily bait fish, I find, will salt and cure a lot better. The fish is firm and it is ready, and it can also be torn apart by hand for hooking and baiting. Afterward, I will transfer it onto the wax paper. Then I will move the sardine onto the wax paper. The reason I put them on the wax paper prior to throwing them in the Ziploc bag into the freezer is because if I were to pack them into the Ziploc bag with no protectant in between each layer, the fish will stick to each other, and when trying to use them as bait, you'll pull apart multiple chunks of multiple fish. By doing this, I'm able to just unroll the wax paper and pull out the bait fish I need for the application I'm using them for. Now for the final step, I will get a clean freezer dry bag or Ziploc bag, and I will now put the parcels of sardine into the bag. This process is very important that you get a clean bag. What you don't want to do is to make sure that the fish don't get freezer burn, because if you use a bag with some liquid in it, that will defeat the whole purpose of curing the bait for the fishing application it is intended for. The liquid will actually dissolve the wax paper, thus causing the fish to stick to each other, and it will also be very prone to getting freezer burn. With this kind of bait, I find that I can store the bait for about 3 months time before I get freezer burn. The last thing you want to fish with is a bait that is no longer effective because the freezer burn had rendered all the oil out. Once it's all in the bag, I will throw it in the freezer until the next fishing trip. Hopefully this clarifies the whole situation with the salt cure baits I've been using. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, tight lines y'all.